again, it's that power of opting out, the thing that you can not take on gigs because you have your bottom line taken care of. Any gigs you take on by choice rather than necessity. And it's that thing of doing something because you want to, not because you have to, which I guess, again, relationships, if you're with someone because you choose to be with them, not because you desperately need a partner to organise your life or pay your bills or whatever reasons people have for getting together that aren't quite right.
It's a much more empowering way to run your career, isn't it? To feel like you're opting into something and you're able to walk away.
Hi and welcome to Big Gig Energy, a podcast by musicians for musicians, helping you get bigger gigs, no matter what level you're at. I'm your host, Steve Leggett, and with 10 years experience as a professional musician, doing everything from pubs and functions to travelling the world in a ukulele boy band, I understand that being a musician is rarely the glamorous experience people make it out to be, and that building your career up to a point where you get to go pro is about the most challenging professional leap of faith there is. But I'm going to use my experience and insight, and maybe a guest or two, to help you activate your own big gig energy and take things to the next level, whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out. So, let's get to it.
Hi there, and welcome to the last episode of the first ever series of Big Gig Energy. To finish things off with a bang, I've a third and final special guest of the series, but plot twist, she'll be interviewing me. This is going to be a bumper edition of the podcast to finish off the season with aplomb, and I really hope you find it interesting and or helpful. Like I say, it's going to be quite a bit longer than the previous episodes. I think it's currently looking at running at about an hour and a half. So I'll just say the first hour or so of it is specifically talking about the focus of the episode, which is well-being and mental health in the music industry. And then the last 20 minutes or so is going to be the regular Big Gig Energy interview type stuff, but where I'll be interviewed. So yeah, if you find the main bit gets a bit heavy or whatever and you just want to hear me talk about music for a bit, then just skip to about half an hour from the end. But I'm fortunate enough to have work and wellbeing coach Alice Lyons with me today, and she's going to be grilling me on my experiences, particularly about a specific time in my career when I was like, I've quit music forever, man, I'm never going to play bass again, for about 2 months before the lure of the stage lights called me back, and I realised playing music live is what I was born to do. Like myself, Alice is a true generalist, primarily a work and wellbeing coach for businesses and individuals, but she also runs a content coaching business, maintains not one but 2 podcasts, regularly appears on discussion panels and as a speaker at events. She's a vocal suicide prevention advocate, and when she's not doing any of that, she's either on a long walk somewhere, looking after someone's dog, or busy being a very big deal on LinkedIn. And she puts up with having me as a partner too, the absolute legend. So I've asked Alice to interview me for this episode, partly because I think I have some insights which I think might come better from a conversational interview than from an episode plan that I sort of script out or whatever. But also because Alice's insight after years working as a professional business wellbeing specialist should really shine a light on some of the most powerful considerations around being a performing artist, which we know isn't always smiles and sunshine. Some of the conversation might/will get a bit heavy. So just a quick sort of safeguarding trigger warning type thing. There will be some mentions of depression and suicidality. I promise not to go into too much detail, but if you're in a bad place right now or just not feeling up to it, you may wish to listen another day when you are feeling up to it. If you're not feeling in a good headspace right now, please do just tune in another day when you are up to it. But anyway, without further ado, here's part 1 of the interview.
Hey Steve.
Hey Alice.
Thanks for having me on the Big Coffee podcast.
Big Coffee. That's what this is. This is Dark Coffee X Big Gig Energy, I suppose.
Shit, yeah,
it's almost like a crossover episode.
Oh, I love that. But no, officially we're on the Big Gig Energy podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here to interview you. So not as a guest, because I'm not musical enough to qualify. But...
Well, you're technically a guest. You're just not being interviewed, I suppose. You're the guest interviewer rather than the guest interviewee.
I like that. So today we're going to be talking about a very interesting, quite heavy topic, some would say, but we're going to keep it light. And that is mental health and wellbeing in the music industry. I'm really glad you're approaching this, first of all, because I think it's such an important topic that needs to be discussed in every industry. And we're going to dive into a bit more detail about why it's so prominent for the music industry specifically later. But before all of that, I just want to say very quickly, congratulations on finishing season 1.
Thank you very much.
That's exciting.
It's been a journey.
Yeah, how do you feel now you're an official big deal?
I mean, I guess I always was, and now it's official. I'm 10 episodes in. I've got a nice double-digit number of episodes, which is beautiful, and more than one person has listened to any of them, which is also really good. It's more than I expected, more than I hoped for, and just thanks once again to everybody that's been tuning in. I think
you smashed your target within about 4 episodes, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I had a number in mind of listens I wanted, and thank heavens and thank everybody that has. It's shown that it was actually worth, because when you first think of doing one of these things, you don't think anyone's actually going to listen to it. You'd be very arrogant to go, oh, well, millions of people are going to love what I'm doing, and I'm going to be the next, what's his face, Stephen
Bartlett.
That guy, yeah, be the next one. It's like, nah, it's like you go into it, if you've got any sense, well, it's just me talking to a microphone in my room. There's a good chance no one's going to give a shit. So the fact that anyone's actually bothered listening, it does mean the world.
So what do you think that means for the music industry and the fact that it has had so much interest?
I think it shows there's a bit of a gap in the market for it in the UK, at least, certainly. I mean, there's a few other music podcasts out there, and some of them are really amazing. I've sort of not name checked, but have inspired me as I got going. So things like Wong Notes with Corey Wong, and Broken Record with Rick Rubin, and Malcolm Gladwell, incredible podcast, really well put together, well produced. The questions are just incredible. So I've been inspired by those sorts of things, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot out there for specifically the music industry in the northwest of England as I know it and as I've experienced it. It's all sort of people either much further above that or people that haven't quite got out and gigging yet.
And that's quite difficult if you're, I don't want to say a beginner musician, because a lot of people listening, I'm sure, have been in the industry 10, 15 years, but sometimes when you look at an industry, the only people we ever hear from are the ones who are sort of multi-millionaires and they're playing like mega stages in whatever industry. So I think it's really nice that you're giving a platform for everybody else who make up, say, 95% of the industry.
Well, I think it's important to do that. I remember when I first told my careers advisor in school, and I said I want to be a musician. I think I played just keyboard at the time, and I said I want to do this for a living. I love music. I want to be a musician. What are the routes? How do I go and become a professional musician? And she turned around and she sort of went, leave that with me. And she sort of sheathed through a load of notes behind her and pulled out a photocopied sheet of paper, basically saying, to be a professional musician, you've got to have made it, in inverted commas, become famous. You've got to be very, very lucky to do that. And then you make your money by selling out stadiums and selling record albums and all this sort of thing. And I was like, yeah, but there's got to be other ways of making music. And she's like, oh, well, you could join an orchestra, join a conservatoire. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right. So luckily, it turned out there was a bit of a gap in her knowledge. And when I got to uni, I was able to start getting paid gigs around Liverpool, and from there move into like the wedding scene, and then obviously fell in with my band and started touring the world and all that sort of thing.
That's really interesting as a kind of early experience in your music career, because could you imagine like somebody else who's not as obsessed with music as yourself could have taken that as like the gospel of like, well, she's the career advisor, she knows everything there is to know about the industry. You as a young person could have taken that really strongly to heart, and that could have ended your career before it even started. Absolutely.
Yeah. Luckily for me, I was cynical enough to go, well, even then I realised the way the industry works, you've got to be very, very, and to be fair, I think this sheet of paper I was given said the same. You've got to be very, very lucky, and you've got to be in the right place at the right time, and it's nothing to do with how good you are. It's just whether you speak to the right people at the right time, and that's what defines if you get, if you make it in a big sense a lot of the time.
So what we're kind of leaning into here in this conversation so far is expectations and maybe managing your expectations. How important would you say that is for any musician at any point in their career?
Yeah, it's essential. It's absolutely essential. You've got to go in it realistically. Obviously, some people do make it, and a lot of them have worked really bloody hard to do it, and they've earned that place. I always think of, I think it was Madonna who camped outside a record label HQ for months on end, handing out, I need to look up the exact story, but I remember she put some graft in to get where she was. And there's a lot of bands about today that, to be fair to them, they're very successful and they have earned their place and they deserve to be there. But then equally, there are a lot of bands where they've been put together by somebody with a whole lot of budget behind them and has pushed their album and pushed their record sales and all these things. And they become household names, not by virtue of having ever met before they were put in the project. A bit like we saw with One Direction being put together live on TV on X Factor, and then they became a huge deal. And they released some great music, but they were put together strictly as a business venture, and it's not like they ever met up in a garage and played music together before that point.
So what do you think, based on your 10 years in the industry, if you're going to give a formula for success in the music industry, what would you say it is? What kind of combination of personality traits, skills do you think are essential?
It depends on what your definition of success is. I think that's the thing is, I think whatever your idea of success is, and I think the more realistic one would just be to comfortably make a living from it. But to be able to do that, it's just about your personality, really. I think there's a certain basic level of ability you've got to have. There's a certain musicality, which I think you could learn it if you didn't have it naturally, but if you have it naturally, it would certainly help.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that combined with being easy to get along with, easy to get on with, and also have that business head on and recognise immediately that it's a commodity. It's just the same as if you were to take up a new skill, or if you were to train for a new vocation. If you were to take up lessons welding, you would go into that going, well, I'm doing this because I'm going to get employed as a welder, and welders get paid loads. And it's something.
You're not doing it for the love of welding.
Yeah, exactly. You're not doing it that you're going to sort of start turning up on people's doorsteps and offering to do welding for free for them. Like, oh, I noticed your car's a bit rusty. Do you mind if I do the rear sills for you? You know, you don't do it for that. You do it because actually that's a vocation you can get into. And obviously, if you're into doing up old cars and things, it's a useful skill to have. But if you're going to pay the money to learn to do it properly, then it's usually a vocational thing, and you recognise that from the get-go. And that's not always the case with musicians. When you get music lessons in school, for example, most of us will have had, you know, piano or violin or flute or whatever, recorder at the very least in school. And at no point in those lessons are you told, well, you're doing these to get good, because if you're good, there's a chance you might get paid for it one day. It's a nice thing you do because your mum suggests you do it.
Yeah, I think there's a perception sometimes that the arts are there to be enjoyed, but not really as a viable career. So I can imagine it's quite frustrating for people when they are trying to break into the industry of, am I going to be taken seriously? And maybe they don't take themselves seriously initially because they're trying to make that transition between going from this is my art, this is my passion, this is what I love, to this is a job and it's a skill and it's something that I can monetize. So do you think this is where any kind of friction comes in for people? Do you think this is why people find it difficult to make a career in the music industry?
I think it comes from the other side. It's perceptions of it. People see artists and musicians being people that love what they do. And if they love what they do and they do it voluntarily in their own time, therefore, if I want them to play an event for me, then they'll be happy to do it just for the exposure or just for the fun of it, because they love doing it so much. And obviously it's unfortunate that it's not helped. There are some people in the industry, well, not really in the industry, unfortunately, where their attitude is very much, oh, I love playing music and it's all I love. I'm just here for the music and I'm happy to play a wedding for 30 quid a head because I just love it so much. And obviously, if you're there as a budding professional trying to do a gig, we had it a lot with, there was a university in Liverpool, which I won't name, but it was a specific music college, which is quite well known in Liverpool. And we used to struggle with them because as part of the coursework for this particular music college in Liverpool, you were supposed to do so many gigs a term. And you just had to get out and you had to do this many gigs as part of it. And on the one hand, that's great because actual gigging experience is really valuable. On the other hand, it meant as a 4-piece covers band, if you approach a bar and say, this is our price, we'd like to play, please, they turn around and say, well, actually, we've got a 15-piece soul and funk band with a full brass section from that university/college down the road that are willing to do it for £10 a head.
Oh, damn.
What have you got that they haven't? And we go, well...
Experience?
Well, I guess experience, but at the same time, it's difficult to compete with that because obviously coming out of college, they're spending all their time practicing. They are genuinely very good, but then by being happy to accept that low of a payment, they're then spoiling it for everyone else and they're devaluing the art form overall. And that's not really their fault because they're being forced to gig that much by the coursework. It's just somebody somewhere hasn't really thought through the effect it has on the wider music industry, and particularly in Liverpool, which has such a great music scene. If that were to be devalued and people are to get away with charging less than they're worth, it just makes it harder for everyone else who's actually out there trying to make a living, including those very students when they get out of university and they then try and start their own band and start getting paid a decent amount that they can live off. They're then having to compete with 12-piece bands that do it for
And they can look back on their younger self and be like, wow, we were a bunch of arseholes, weren't we?
Yeah, that's it. Which I suppose is the greatest lesson of all.
It's the circle of life.
It really is.
It says we all cannibalise each other in the end.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's interesting because when you're talking about the music industry like this, it's almost like the whole industry is geared up to fuck you over and to make you feel bad about yourself. So first question as a non-musician is, why would anybody want to go into this? Because you've obviously done this whole season where you've been talking about treating music as a commodity, treating it like a business, how to go through the steps. But based on the kind of bleak picture that we've painted of the industry, why would anybody want to do this?
Because they love it. For the love. That's exactly why. It's, if you truly love doing something and there's a chance that you can monetize it and be paid for doing it, then why wouldn't you take it? Anyone with any hobby, it's their dream to be able to just do that for a living, regardless of whether that's playing golf or collecting stamps or whatever. It's just a lot harder to make a living collecting stamps than it is to go and play weddings, for example.
And I guess the cool thing with the podcast is that you've explored it in lots of different ways, because I always thought as a non-musician, the only way you can make it a viable career is to sell out stadiums and sell a load of CDs back in the day. But then I was thinking about Spotify and downloads, and I was like, well, no one's making money that way, surely. So as a non-musician, it kind of feels like unless you mega make it, there's no way to make it viable. But from getting to know you and getting to know your friends and how other people make it, there are actually a lot of really interesting avenues to explore, and things like doing composing or doing full-time work within the music industry, doing something like sound design or teching of some sort, and then playing gigs on the weekend. There are so many different ways that you can explore it.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of assumption that you see sort of the stereotype of a rock star, and obviously they're there in their mansion and they're bored on a Saturday afternoon, so they drive their Rolls Royce into a swimming pool, and that's just what they do. I think Ringo or one of the Beatles actually did that once. Wow. Somebody did that. It was one of the guys from Oasis. Same people, but somebody did that anyway. And that's just the stereotype of what a rock star does, and it's obviously there is that element of the industry, but for most people, most working professionals in the industry, they're on maybe a little bit over minimum wage, and they're playing 4 or 5 gigs a week every single week in order to support that, in addition to usually teaching or something else as well as a side hustle. Not least because of January and February being such quiet months, and like any self-employment, it's very feast or famine. You're either doing very, very well over summer when it's wedding season and you've got weddings almost every day of the week, or it's January and you're fucked. Which
is really difficult, isn't it? As a lifestyle, it's probably not the easiest career in the world if you want stability, if you want a regular cash flow, if you want regular hours. Yeah, unless you're kind of working behind the scenes, I imagine that's not really possible.
Well, this is the thing, yeah. I know a few guys now who are starting to sort of settle down a little bit and start families and that sort of thing. A few people have sort of just had babies or about to. And I don't know how... I'll be interested to follow and see how they get on with that. I've seen a lot of them taken on second jobs and looking at other sources of income and things that's a bit more stable. But in general, it's a very antisocial industry to work in. A bit like in the bar trade, where you're working late hours, long hours.
Yeah.
A lot of the hours you're working, you're not getting paid for. For example, if you were to drive to a gig that's a long way away, you might do 6 hours driving for one gig, and you're not really getting paid a proportionate amount extra for that driving a lot of the time. So there's that, in addition to obviously wedding season. We're going to find out later this year, Saturdays are pretty much a write-off, because most musicians will be out gigging every single Saturday night, if not every single Friday night as well. So that makes socialising really difficult. That's the time most other people will be free to go out and have nights out and things, and it can be quite difficult finding ways to socialise without cancelling gigs and losing money. And then a night out, most people might spend 50 to 70 quid on a night out if they're really going for it. But then if you're losing out on a gig that pays 350 quid, then that night out is then costing you 350 quid plus the 50 or 70 or whatever you spend on bevs. So it gets very expensive very quickly to turn these things down in order to socialise and have a life outside of work.
So we'll talk about ways to stay sane whilst working in the industry later. But first I want to go down a darker path. I want to start with what can go wrong and what can happen if you go too far in the opposite direction, when the music kind of turns a bit bleak. So I think the best way that we can explore this is to talk about your own personal experience, because you've kind of drip fed into some of the other episodes that you went through a difficult time with your mental health while working in the industry. So I'd like to unpack that today, because I think it's such a good case study for people to maybe spot some of the warning signs that are coming up for themselves, but also to look out for other people as well, because I think there's the romance and the beauty of being on stage, and everybody can seem like they're having a great time, but actually behind the scenes some things can be going wrong that perhaps they're not aware of. So talk to me about your earlier career. You started off playing cruise ships, didn't you, professionally, sort of out of uni and things. You tell the story. Give me a brief backstory.
The cruise ships were sort of midway through the career. So I started off, I cut my teeth on the open mics of Liverpool, and then the band I was doing open mic, or the band grew out of doing the open mics, and then we started doing weddings, and we did lots of pubs for years, and then weddings and things. And then when I left uni, I was in a position to go full time with the ukulele band that I joined as well. And then with that band, we ended up doing the whole progression from open mics to pubs to weddings to corporates, and then finally onto cruise ships. which was a real journey. But I think the thing was, because it was just one band I was doing all that with, and I was on the ukulele bass, which wasn't my sort of standard instrument, I think there was a point where I got a bit saturated with it, because that's all I was doing. We were playing the exact same sets at pretty much every gig, and obviously on the cruise ships we were only gigging once a week, and the rest of the time we were just sitting around like paid guests, and that was amazing. It was really great. Yeah, hitting the buffet all the time and all that sort of thing, getting paid to sit by the pool and explore all these exotic locations. But I think that lifestyle, it can isolate you a lot. And obviously you're there with the band, and the guys are like my brothers. They are now, and they were then, and we all had that camaraderie, which was great. But at the same time, if your heart and soul isn't 100% in what you're doing, and I was always a bit like, I'd love the band, I love what we're doing, but I never, when I imagined myself as a professional musician, I didn't think the one band that would be successful would be the ukulele band that I started as a joke with some mates at uni. I think it literally started off with one of the lads calling me up and saying, hey, do you want to start a ukulele band for a laugh? And I was like, I'm not doing anything else this week, why not? And that's how we got started. So for that to be, out of all the bands you're in and all the serious originals bands with serious things to say, it's the one where you dance about on stage playing George Formby and, ukulele covers of Beyonce. And I think that just for me personally, and this is very much on a personal level, and, again, no shade on the lads because I'm so proud of everything we've done together, but for me personally, to see myself as a professional musician, but the catch was it's doing this happy clappy stuff. And then, we'd be on the ships all the time playing to mostly older audiences. And if we commented something, if we did a post on Facebook, all the comments would be people going, oh, I saw you on the P&O cruise ship or whatever it was last year. And it wasn't the direction we wanted to go as a band, because we wanted to do more original stuff and push that. And then where they're playing the same sets all the time. And it got to a point where I got quite bitter, not just towards my situation and whatever, but also towards the audiences. People would be coming up to me at the end of the show and going, oh, that was amazing, that was the best thing I've ever seen. We used to quite commonly get, I was expecting you to be shit, but you were really good. And I loved that, dealing with expectations and improving their expectations. But when somebody is watching you do something and they're crazy into it and you don't want to be there and you're not into it, there's that disconnection can be really quite, for me, I think that was probably the most destructive thing, because someone come up and go, that was the best thing I've ever seen, I've never been so entertained, and you go, I was fucking bored during that. I've played that show so many times, and obviously I'm still jumping around, I'm still performing like a professional, but internally I'm there sort of planning my breakfast 4 days from now. It's just, I think I'd just been doing it for too long. That's the biggest theme. Again, it's not that there was anything wrong with what I was doing or my relationship with the band or anything like that, although obviously that did suffer a bit as a result of my not wanting to be there. But I'd been doing it for far too long, and it got to a point where it just all got a bit too much. And I think my turnaround point was waking up one morning and being like, oh, bloody hell, I'm on Mykonos again. And that was the point where I was like, no, this is no good. It's just a sign of not quitting while you're ahead, and not quitting when there's still a love for it, and you just sort of become a bit embittered, and you start to resent the audiences that enjoy what you do just by virtue of the fact that you're not enjoying it anymore, so why should they be?
It's a really interesting parallel that I'm drawing as you're talking there love is a really important word to talk about, because it almost is like a relationship, and in a similar way to a relationship, you could be with someone who you're like, on paper, everything's great. We vibe, we get on, and I'm not walking towards breaking up with you, don't worry. Okay. You're just looking at me terrified right now. No, I'm just in the abstract. But we've all been in those relationships where you're like, honestly, there's nothing wrong with them. Everything's fine. But there's just not something there. And it's nothing objectively wrong. Like, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint it necessarily. It's just you don't vibe for whatever reason. And I feel like that's kind of what happened with you, like you're saying, that the band was great, the idea, the concept, brilliant, and you probably really enjoyed it in the beginning, but then you sort of gradually fell out of love with it. And like you said, that's, as with a relationship, that would be the time to leave. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the other person, it just means it's not for you anymore.
Yeah, it's that thing of like exactly like a relationship where people grow apart, or the sort of the love goes out, and you catch yourself sort of going through the motions of doing something or whatever.
I'm just holding your hand to say that's not what's happening, don't worry.
we still good, yeah, we still cool, yeah. But I think that's what happened, and it wasn't any reflection on my relationship with them, or I still love, and to this day I still gig with them occasionally, and I love all the boys so much, like my own brothers, all of them. And that was also part of the reason I found it so difficult to process what was going on, because I was also going through an autism diagnosis at the time and all these other things, finding out all these things about myself that I just had no idea, and these huge pieces of the puzzle of who exactly I was were falling into place. And then as that's going on, I'm doing this thing which on paper is amazing. I'm getting paid to travel all over the world, having to do very little work for the money I was getting. And yeah, on paper I should have been having the best time ever, and I wasn't. And I started to resent myself for that, because I was like, you ungrateful bastard, there's so many people, including yourself a few years ago, would have killed to be in this position that you're in now, so why aren't you enjoying it? How dare you not enjoy it? And that was part of what led me into such a spiral of depression and other grim stuff that went on later.
So how did that manifest for you? Because obviously from the outside, probably to your bandmates or to the audiences, they see this guy jumping around, having the time of his life, big smile plastered on his face, posting on Instagram next to the beach and stuff like that. But how did you know that there was anything wrong with your sort of mental health and your well-being? What else was going on? What might other people not have seen?
Yeah, it was a complicated part of my life. I was in a bit of I'll gently say I was in a bit of a problematic relationship at the time at home, which didn't help. So anytime I was away, I was longing to be home. And then anytime I was home, I was longing to be away again, because neither one truly felt safe mentally for me. So that was a real challenge. So in addition to that sort of dichotomy of being there and being away, there was this I had this like sad clown thing going on, is the whole thing about the trope of the depressed clown. There's the old joke of guy goes to a shrink and says, "Oh, doctor, I'm really, really depressed. I don't know what to do. I'm so down. I feel almost quite suicidal and things." And the doctor goes, "Mate, don't worry. The great Mephistopheles is in town today." Don't know why I said that's a shit clown name, but the great insert clown name here is in town today. Go see him. And the guy goes, "But that's the problem, doctor. I am the great Mephistopheles," or whatever the fuck the clown's called in this thing. I am that clown. And it's just been a trope through, they have like the sort of the drawn on makeup of like the tears by their eyes and things. And the funny guy is often, the funniest people often have the darkest mental health going on. I mean, I always think of Robin Williams, legitimately very funny man, outwardly very outgoing. And we all know what happened there, and it was really, truly tragic. And I think if somebody is almost over the top in how happy they appear and how funny they are, and a lot of it comes from wanting to be liked by other people and wanting to be found funny and wanting to fit in. And that often comes from a bit of a darker place than you might assume it does. Not always, but a lot of the time. And it's been borne out with a lot of the comics I've worked with, actually. A lot of the funniest people I've worked with have also been a little bit, their mental health's been a little bit sketchy. And that's been from what I've perceived with having a couple of drinks with them after a show, and heaven only knows quite what they had going on that they weren't just willing to share with some random bass player they were chatting to.
So don't trust happy people is what we're saying. So what kind of things were happening? How did your sort of misery manifest itself, if you like? What kind of things were happening maybe behind the scenes?
I was just becoming very withdrawn. I was just sort of isolating myself from the band, mainly because I didn't want to drag them down, and obviously my self-esteem was taking a hit, and I was just like, I don't want to make them as miserable as I am and all those sort of things, and they might not want to be. And I didn't feel like I really fit in anywhere, and this all, part of this is connected to the autism diagnosis I had going on. Because I was depressed, it was bringing out the worst of my symptoms of that, and making me even worse around people and in social situations, and knowing what cues to follow and how to generally put your human suit on and get on with that sort of thing. So I became very withdrawn, and I'd spend all day long either sleeping or I find when I'm depressed I just sleep as much as I possibly can, just to basically pass the time. You just sort of count it, and the cabins on those ships became like prison cells to me towards the end. I'd sit in them sort of basically reading, doing the equivalent of bouncing the ball off the wall like Steve McQueen in Great Escape. Like it genuinely was really quite difficult. So there'd be times I'd go up to the back of the ship in the middle of the night and just think, oh, it could be really nice just to jump off, and it was not something I think I would have ever actioned, but just sort of fantasizing about it really helped, because it was like a release valve. Sometimes just thinking about these things, and obviously you've talked about this a lot in Solving Suicide, your podcast on the matter, but sometimes just imagining those scenarios can really help you get through the current thing, and I guess just put a little bit of perspective on it and just prove to you that you're not quite there yet. Because there maybe for a lot of people there is a point where they think, yeah, actually, yeah, screw it, and off they go. But for me, I always found a reason to go back to bed.
But I always think that's a nice, it's not a nice thing for anyone to go through, but for me was suicide ideation, which is what you're picking up on there, sort of having a suicidal fantasy. I think for a lot of people it's just that feeling of there is a way out. I might not want to take it, but perceptively there is a way out of this situation. It's not just, you know, I'm not rinse and repeat doing the same show over and over again. This is not where I'm going to end things. Like, there is always a way out. But I think sometimes that mental escape is enough, isn't it, to just kind of calm yourself back down again and, like you say, give yourself some perspective and go, okay, cool, well, that's the end of that thought, let's go back to bed.
Yeah, that's it. I suppose it's a bit like if you're in a relationship and you find yourself fantasizing about seeing someone else as well.
Say killing them.
Killing them.
Suicide pact.
You haven't bothered me that much yet. No. Yeah.
Well, I was saying a really bad precedent for our relationship now.
This isn't good. I feel this is a mark of security that we're able to talk about these things.
Okay.
Let's go with
Any
that.
psychologists listening may disagree.
Yeah, we'll see about that. But I suppose it's a step on a path, isn't it? Like, you know, first you find yourself fantasizing about something, but it's still just as cheating on a partner. Actually doing that is a long way from you fantasize. If you see someone attractive in the street, you're going to imagine stuff with them long before you're actually going to go up to them and just, you know, proposition.
But that's so interesting, isn't it? Because with suicidal thoughts, I think we're so quick to attach meaning to that. Whereas, like you said, in a different context that maybe we've talked about a lot, like throughout human history, people have openly discussed relationship dynamics in like news and television, radio, and, you know, just general conversation on the street and stuff. But I think it's quite a known thing of like, you can have a thought but not act on it, and that's fine, and there's no judgment attached to the thought necessarily.
Absolutely. I think with suicide there's just that much greater element of taboo attached to it. It's a much more taboo subject. We still, even us talking about this on a music podcast is quite revolutionary even today, really. You know, it's so rarely done that people talk about.
How does it feel to be a trendsetter?
I know. I mean, the thing, it has been done before. I mean, I think of the Pink Floyd's film The Wall, and Bob Geldof looking very young, got a fantastic rock voice on him, but there's that scene of him shaving his nipples and then going absolutely batshit crazy, trashing a hotel room and then bleeding out in the pool almost. Like, it's this idea of the tortured artist. It's been quite fetishized over the years, but even then, the idea of them actually killing themselves is that whole extra step. It's like, yeah, it's okay, you can trash as many hotel rooms as you want, do as many drugs and hookers as you want, but if you think about topping yourself, then that's a problem.
But that's an interesting segue there, actually, when you're talking about the kind of expected behaviours of like, yes, you know, you can be horribly manically depressed, but that makes you a better artist. It's almost like an expectation. But if it's dramatic enough, if it's almost like showy enough, that's okay. But the way they manifested for you is quite, like you say, quiet, withdrawn. It's not a big showy dramatic episode or anything like that. So firstly, I think it's probably not something people would expect, and secondly, it's not, I don't know if anybody would pick up on it necessarily, because nothing what you said there was intrinsically bad. Like shutting yourself away in a room, I think that's to be expected of people who are performers and you're constantly around other people. So I think one of the key things I'd like to highlight from that part of the conversation is just, it will look different for everyone. Like poor mental health for you will look different from poor mental health for me. And I think one of the key things to look out for in other people is a change in behaviour. So if someone is naturally quite introverted and they kind of naturally go away, it doesn't mean they're depressed. But if they suddenly swing from being very independent and very quiet to suddenly being maybe smashing up hotel rooms, like you said, that would be the sign to look out for in someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no archetype for what poor mental health looks. Just like anything else, like similar with my autism diagnosis. Like when I first had that, I remember telling a very close family member about this, and I think their response was along the lines of, well, I've seen Rain Man and you're nowhere near as bad as him, so you must not have autism. I'm like, well, that's not what the doctors said, but okay.
It's such a stereotype, isn't it, of like, this is what a musician looks like, even to the extent of like trashing hotel rooms. For some people, that's the expectation of like, well, that's just being a hardcore musician, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
Sex,
absolutely.
drugs, rock and roll.
Yeah, but you look at people that have lasted, survived a long time in the industry and been successful and come out the other side of that self-destructive rock and roll patch. They normally end up very zen, and you'll see them and they'll just be extremely relaxed, centered. They'll take care of themselves, they'll meditate, that sort of thing. And it seems to be, it's almost like it's a phase you need to get out of your system, and learning to recognize unhealthy behaviors and self-destructive behaviours.
So what are your thoughts on the tortured artist archetype? Because like we were just saying, there's some really famous examples of people being very full-on sex, drugs, rock and roll, but potentially horrible mental health repercussions. Do you think that's a stereotype we need to get rid of? Do you think it can make people's art and their craft better? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I'm reading a fantastic book at the moment by Rick Rubin, a record producer, and one of his thoughts in that is that a lot of these artists, the reason they're so tortured is because they feel things on a deeper level than a lot of other people. It's not the case for all artists, but there's generally an idea that you're much more sensitive to the world around you, and the emotions that you feel, the highs and the lows, are so much more pronounced to people like that. And I quite like that idea, but it ties into this. A lot of the greatest art has come from very tortured individuals or people that have ended up dying tragically young. So, you know, you've got Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Tim Buckley,
Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, all of these people, and they're sort of very... Kurt Cobain's a fascinating example of it, because obviously he very publicly, very visibly struggled with the limelight and the fame that came from it, but the media and the whole corporate music industry itself, the gears of that, he was fed through those cogs whether he wanted to or not, and he was put in a position where basically it shouldn't really have been a surprise to anyone what happened, and what's really shocking is that nothing was done to prevent it.
I always thought that with Chester Bennington. If you listen to most of Linkin Park's music, that's the music I used to listen to as a young person who was feeling quite depressed and suicidal, and I was like, I felt seen by that music. So the fact that maybe he was expressing himself in that way and it wasn't, nobody did anything about it, or potentially, you know, maybe they tried, we don't know what went on behind the scenes, but yeah, it's really sad to think sometimes, because there is a difference, I think, between emotional ill health and mental ill health, and I think sometimes we do need to draw the distinction there. There's a lot of crossover there. So let's bring it back to that time when you were obviously at your lowest, not feeling great in the band, not feeling great in yourself. What started to change for you? You had the kind of epiphany in Mykonos of like, oh no, Mykonos again. Where did you go after that?
I think I realised around that time I needed to change a few big things about my life. So I think the first thing, before I changed the problematic relationship I was in, I think I was still sort of trying to fight for that at the time, but the certainly the band, I thought, well, that I was really not enjoying my work. I wasn't enjoying being a musician. I wasn't even enjoying music anymore. There was a time music was everything I did, and any time I wasn't working, I'd be playing and all this sort of thing, and that had completely gone from my life. I wasn't enjoying music at all at the time, so I was like, well, first things first, I need to change career. So over a process of quite a while, actually, I gave about 6 months notice to make sure we had time to get someone in to replace me, and because I was the first member to ever leave Jukebox, and it was important to me that it carried on. I didn't want to be a reason that it fizzled out. I didn't want them to go, oh well, you know, it's funny how I could be so down but also arrogant enough to think that no one could possibly replace me, which again, it's the sort of the artist mindset. It's so contradictory in so many ways, but thank heavens we found my replacement, James Rookyard, who's a fantastic bass player, really entertaining guy to watch, and a really talented singer as well. And he really stepped up to it, and the band's really stronger since I left. And you know, it's moved on to better and bigger things now, which is great. But that was my big worry, was, you know, I don't want to. If you're that depressed, the last thing you want to do is cause anyone any trouble. And I think at the time I just weighed it up and was like, actually, it'll be grim if I leave and have them find a replacement, but it'll be worse for them if I jump off the back of a cruise ship in the middle of the night.
Out of the two.
Yeah, at least that way they get 6 months notice, you know. So that was the first thing I did, and then obviously in time it took me a lot longer, but the relationship as well that was causing a lot of trouble had become by this point quite unhealthy on a few levels. When that ended, I was sort of able to really get things under control. And then when I found my current full-time vocation as a guitar tech, found that job doing that, and then that really turned things around, because suddenly I was able to have a sort of meaningful career that would cover my bills, give me stability, give me all of these things I was craving, and I could support myself and not have to worry about things like that. But I could also have the freedom to go and gig on the weekends again, and basically the freedom to fall back in love with music, which, again, if you spend a year or two playing to crowds of 1,200 people, all of whom you shake hands with after the show, all of whom tell you the best thing you've ever seen and buy signed CDs, but you hate every minute of what you're doing because you've fallen out of love with it and you don't enjoy it anymore, if you don't enjoy something and you feel obliged to do it, you're going to really hate that experience. So hating that experience and have people, it was just such a disconnect. So putting all that behind me and just changing the circumstances which had led to me being in that state of poor mental health, and like even now I've made a point of working with lots and lots of different bands at once, and this thing of being a hired gun, it really works, and it won't work for everyone. A lot of people work better having just one band and that's what they do and that's their full-time thing, and a lot of people are very happy playing the same songs every night, same set every night, and it's cool and great for them. But for me personally, I like to have a variety. I like that, which is weird because you think with autism it would be important to have a structure and have repetition and be doing the same thing every night, but for me I think mixing it up a bit and not always knowing exactly what's coming next and having different bands on the go, it keeps it fresh and it stops it from getting, I guess it challenges me as a musician as well to go, I'm playing with this band tonight, I do that particular song this way and not the other way, because they all do it a little bit different. Everyone says do it to the record, and then you actually play with them and the drummer might put a bit in somewhere or something might be different.
So you skipped over it a little bit just then, but there was actually a period where you left the music industry. So was that a very conscious decision of like, I've had it up to here, I'm that far out of love with it, I have to do something completely different? What was your mindset? Were you kind of anticipating it would be a short break? Were you done with music forever? What was that mindset at that time?
Yeah, when I left Ukebox, so this was getting towards, it must have been August of 2017, I think it was my last gig with Ukebox. And when I left, I was very much, that's it. I've done music. I've been a musician. And by the end, which to me, that meant it had all along, it sucked. And I didn't enjoy it, and it led me to this horrible, dark place. So I was like, you know what? I've been there. Wasn't for me. Don't ever want to do it again. I'm done with music. I never want to pick... I kept hold of my guitars, but I was like, I don't ever want to gig again. It's not something I'm
I pictured a dramatic moment of throwing them off the back of the boat symbolically. Like, I'm not going to jump, but you're going.
I'm far too emotionally attached to my possessions to do that, unfortunately. It would have made for, when they make the biopic about me, then
that is going in.
It's got to happen. But yeah, no, I just decided that was it. I didn't want to do it professionally anymore. I didn't really want to play anymore. I had no appetite for it. Maybe on some level, that's probably why I held on to my... I still had quite a few guitars even back then, and on some level maybe I did think I'd want to at least start playing for my own pleasure again.
Yeah.
But at the time when I left, I never wanted to do it again, and my immediate first job back, I needed to get some kind of work in, obviously, and I just got a job stacking shelves in
which will beep out with an ocarina.
Yeah, which will beep out at a later point. But as I've previously mentioned in another episode of this podcast, stacking shelves at this particular supermarket was a terrible experience. And it made me think, actually, you go from basically being paid to travel the world, work for an hour and a half a week, and the rest of the time you're being paid to just go and sit on a beach on Mykonos or the Caribbean or Rio or wherever. To go from that to getting fired from a job because you weren't allowed to wear a coat in a freezer on Christmas Eve, and then you got ill. You had the cheek to get ill after that.
The audacity.
It shows.
I have to
you
say
the
though, there's quite a lot of variables between those two extremes. Did you not think at some point, like, maybe there's something not stacking shelves but also not in the music industry, or was that enough of a reality check for you to be like, actually, I realise what I've given up here. Maybe I gave up on music too soon. Maybe she is the love of my life.
I think there's a bit of both there. In some ways, it was my eat, pray, love. And I needed to sort of experience that. My mind does work in a very binary fashion. Again, by virtue of the autism, like I'm ones and zeros.
Yeah.
Either something is this or it is this. And it really struggles finding the 0.5s in between and, any variables in between. And I was just so lucky that I found the other career, the work with Jack's Instrument Services. When that job came up on Facebook, I've been following them for a couple of years before then, but when I saw they were looking to take on, it might have been maybe my last week at the supermarket when I saw that job advertised. I was on my break at 3 a.m. because I was working 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. on my 15-minute allowed break at 3 a.m, and I was there looking, and I saw this and I was like, I'm probably hallucinating this, but I'll apply anyway. And there for the grace of God go I. But I managed to. Why did I say that? I never say that. But yeah, and by sheer luck, I managed to get that job, and it absolutely turned my life around. Really, it was exactly what because the beauty of that job as a luthier and working within an established company as well, I was able to work with musical instruments, with guitars, which I loved, and I'd always enjoyed the setup side. I'd been like the sort of the unofficial guitar tech of Ukebox with them. If somebody's ukulele broke in the middle of the Atlantic, I'd be able to fix it with a Swiss Army knife and everything would be fine. So I'd always loved that tech side of it. But to be paid eventually a full-time wage for fixing instruments, it was an absolute dream come true. And it's something I wouldn't have known to look for, because obviously there's so few. There's a lot of luthiers about, and a lot of them, they work out of their mum's living room and they advertise on Facebook Marketplace. There's very few actual companies. You've got people like KGB Music over in the Wirral and a couple of others like that. But there's very few.
KGB.
You've got people like them. You've got people like Jack, obviously, and then there's a few others about where it's sort of usually one-man bands. There's very few other actual companies that you can apply for and not have to worry about running a business and all these other things. Obviously, that was another side of working with Ukebox, was that we were set up as a limited company and we all had our own roles within making those wheels turn and keep that all going. And
I hear good things about the HR director.
Yes. Yeah, Danny, the HR director, you go to him with a complaint, and the sort of the running joke in the band, because obviously there's only 5 of us, he'd just be, "Stop being a whiny little bitch." Like, head of HR, somebody's bullying me, "Stop being a whiny little bitch." It was great. He did a damn fine job. Fine job. Great HR director. If he ever fancies a change of career, because obviously he's still with Ukebox now, if he ever wants to do anything different, there's a lot of companies would be lucky to have him.
I feel like it's his calling.
It really is. It's beautiful. The relish he does it with.
But I think what's beautiful about your story, amongst other things, but one of the lovely things is that it really illustrates just how versatile the music industry is. We don't just have to have this one solid idea of like, that is what it means to make it in the industry. Because as you've said for yourself, you've got a broad range of skills within that. So it was just about finding the right fit for you. And it didn't mean not ever playing bass ever, but it also didn't mean doing that full time. And it's through getting to know you and your friends, it's been lovely to see how many portfolio careers can exist. And that's, to me, from the outside, that seems to be the secret to staying sane with it, is to find lots of different ways to make it work, figuring out kind of what your lifestyle is or what you want your lifestyle to be, and then making music fit around that rather than bending yourself too much to fit the music, if that makes sense.
It's that thing of variety is the spice of life. And yeah, obviously my guitar tech job was still within the music industry, and I was work, but I was also at the time taking on dep gigs as well, because I was like, well, yeah, I need money. Even if I don't want to be a musician anymore, I still need money. And it was a challenge to learn a proper function set for the first time, because Ukebox are at heart a function band, but or at least I think they are anyway, but are a party band. But at the same time, we didn't do things like every other party band does. We don't just play Mr. Brightside. I think they do now in a Killers medley, but again, that's part of a medley with a load of other Killers songs. So
I do love the medleys. I think that's a great shtick.
It's one of the strongest things about Ukebox is their ability to, not only are they making an instrument that sounds god awful sound really good as a result of their production knowledge and things, but also it's the medleys and the way that they get people dancing and they're up, and then once you've heard the chorus of a song you love, most people don't know the second verse. And the beauty of what we did was we then went, right, okay, well, let's do another song that you like as well, and make them segue, and just you can have these huge medleys of sometimes up to 10 or 11 songs, sometimes more. It all flowed. It was all part of the same track from start to finish, and people didn't see that coming. Whereas most covers bands, they will just do a song. So they'll do Brown Eyed Girl and stop, and then play Mr. Brightside and stop, and do Sex on Fire, and so, and all these things. So going and actually learning to be in an actual function band for the few dep gigs I did while I was working at the supermarket, and then as I started to take up eventually more work while I was working with Jack as well, it was nice to keep a hand in the playing side of the music industry, but the fact that I was able to have steady employment still within the industry at the same time as well was just such a game changer for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of got a handle on what you actually wanted from the industry rather than just going where it kind of told you to go, of like, oh, hey, this is the thing that made it. It almost felt like you got pulled along a little bit with Ukebox, but now it feels like you were finally sort of standing on your own terms and saying, this is what I want. I need a job 9 to 5 and I want it to be in the music industry, but also I still want to play. And you're doing it on your own terms.
This is the thing. Yeah, this is very much it. And again, like Ukebox, what they do is amazing, and it's just the dream job. It's such an amazing job to have had, but it wasn't the right job for me. It wasn't the exact right fit for me personally, at least after the first, I think I worked with them for about 5 years. And then after, maybe 3 of those, 4 of those, I got to a point where I was like, right, we're pretty much exclusively doing ships now. I feel I've been there and I need a bit more stability in my life and to know where I'm going to be next week, because a lot of the time we'd have time scheduled off and then we get a cruise coming last minute and you get that call, can you be in Cadiz tomorrow morning at 3 a.m? And we'd be like, right, pack our bags and go. Which, yeah, it's amazing. And for a lot of people, it's a fantastic lifestyle to have. But for me, I just wanted that stability and I wanted to have weekends off. Just that act of Saturday morning, get up early, go for a cycle ride, get a paper and a loaf of bread, come home and chill out like an old man, you know.
When have you ever bought a newspaper? I've never seen you do that.
Yeah, I just craved the simple thing, just craved having a bit more normality and just a bit more routine, which again, I think because of how my brain's wired, I really craved just having that routine and just knowing where things are. And also you'd have really busy months and you'd have quieter months and you wouldn't necessarily get paid the same wage every single month, depending on what was in the coffers, which obviously if you had a great month was fantastic, but then it's nice to know, you know, since I started working just as a regular employee for another company, it's nice. I found how nice it is to just know what you're getting paid every month.
And I feel
any
like
gigs you do are on top of that then.
That's a really important thing to point out as well, because I feel like it's kind of a known thing in the music industry, obviously, that it's not a predictable income, but I don't think maybe people anticipate how much that can really create friction in your own brain of like, if you've gone from a different industry where you do get your regular paycheck month on month, you know, for a lot of people they'll experience this when they go from employment to self-employment, but the drag that can have on your mental health and the way that can affect you, it can be astronomical and it can be really damaging for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it's not exclusive to music, it's definitely anything self-employed. There is that element of feast or famine, and that thing of, I'm sure you found this when you were setting up Dark Coffee and just you have months where you get a load of payments in and you have other months where it's like crickets and tumbleweed in your bank account and you're like, well, I'm working hard, but what have I got to show for it, and this sort of thing. And that was another part of the reason I became quite resentful of audiences at gigs, was that just that pressure when you're playing and you know if you don't play you ain't paying your rent.
Yeah.
Whereas now if I do a gig, because I also work full time in addition to all the gigs that I do, any gig I do, it's basically pocket money. And it's so nice playing and not being out, you're just able to relax and enjoy it on so many more levels, and you get so much more from it, not being there because you have to be there. And again, it's that power of opting out, the thing that you can not take on gigs because you have your bottom line taken care of. Any gigs you take on by choice rather than necessity. And it's that thing of doing something because you want to, not because you have to, which I guess, again, relationships, you know, if you're with someone because you choose to be with them, not because you desperately need a partner to organise your life or pay your bills or whatever reasons people have for getting together that aren't quite right.
It's a much more empowering way to run your career, isn't it? To feel like you're opting into something and you're able to walk away rather than...
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost like metaphorical, sort of my choosing to leave the music industry and then opting back in. It's a bit like my mental health did spiral quite a bit even after I left Jukebox, because obviously I was finding out what I was doing and I was working a really horrible job for a bit, and it got to a point where I actually made a couple of suicide attempts. And it's sort of, once you've made a suicide attempt and you've survived, you do feel like you're opting into life then. It's like you're not just existing like everyone else. Unlike a lot of people on earth, you've then actually chosen to be there by not trying to finish the job, basically, another time. So a bit like with life when I was there and I'd opted into life, opting back into the music industry, having left, and then going, right, I know how it works now. I know what the deal is. I've been there. I've done that. Do I want to do it anymore? And to then choose to go, yeah, actually, at heart, I do love it. And I do want to be part of it, just not in the same way that I was before. I want to make it work for me and my brain and the way that I'm wired as, obviously, again, somebody with autism. It's sort of, you do experience the world very differently. It changes how you perceive things compared to other people. And you have to be very aware of yourself and how things work in order to sort of optimize your experience as a human being.
And I think that's the key theme that people might take away from this episode, and particularly this is something I've learned a lot from you, is that you have to be self-aware. You have to really start with yourself and think about, what do I want? What do I need? And then you can tailor everything to fit around that. So for you, you had considerations of your mental health, your neurodiversity, even just lifestyle factors. But these are things that everyone can do. Like if we have that intention, I guess is the word I'm looking for, if we have that intention for our careers of I want it to work in the most sustainable, enjoyable way that it can, yes, there's going to be bad days, yes, there's going to be challenges, but ultimately I can optimize my career so that my skills are shown off to their best and so that I feel at my best. I think that involves that level of kind of critical self-analysis, I guess, and say, what do I want and need my career to be? And can the music industry meet this, first of all? But if so, how?
Exactly, and just choosing the path that works for you and realising it's a choice as well. And obviously that's the tricky thing, and I guess in a lot of ways that's what this podcast has been about, and about sort of explaining to people that it can be a choice to make things suit them, and just having that confidence to go, actually I'm not going to take that gig because it's not paying enough, or because it's too far away, or whatever, and just opt in to the things that you want and not the things that you don't want.
Just as a little end point to the discussion around mental health and well-being, what kind of advice would you give to other people, as well as the self-awareness piece and as well as making changes to your lifestyle and things like that? What other advice would you give to people if they are having a difficult time with their mental health? What other things would you advise that they do to support themselves?
I'll say just learn to know yourself. That's the best thing you can possibly do. Like, it's such a cop-out answer to just go get help, talk to someone that cares, because when you're going through a period of bad mental health, the last thing you want to do is to talk to anyone about anything. You just want to isolate yourself off. You don't want to talk to family, you don't want to talk to friends, you, whether intentionally or in an aware fashion or not, you do everything you can to isolate yourself from everyone that cares about you. So the idea of going to someone that cares about you and then going, I think I'm having a really rough time of it. So, disclaimer here, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't know what's best in terms of these things, I don't know what to recommend, but what helped me was understanding why I was feeling these ways. And for me that meant hearing about autism, thinking, damn, I should probably look up what this thing is, because actually at the time I think you're still able to call it Asperger's without being on PC, but obviously, because again, the Rain Man thing, people don't realise it's a spectrum, and a lot of people that meet me are quite surprised when I say I have it. But once I realised, and it was sort of an obstacle really actually to getting the diagnosis and to realising and making these changes, was anyone going, oh well, you're not as bad as this or whatever. It's like, actually you can still have that going on. But
you had support with that, didn't you? You worked with a therapist to help you get that diagnosis, didn't you?
Well, that was it as well, yeah. So I had a very close friend sort of helped me out with that side of it, and then I was going through some other basically it was meant to be anger management. It sort of turned into CBT and learning helpful thinking styles and learning to phase out the unhelpful ways of thinking. And again, just that idea of learning to know myself as well as I could. And when you know yourself, you can understand yourself, you can forgive yourself. And when I got the diagnosis, I was able to look back at so many points in my life and things that would keep me awake at night going, why did I do that thing when I was in year 3 in school? Or why did that affect me so badly? Or why did I say that? And I could look back and actually I could forgive myself for doing that, because looking back at it through a lens of neurodiversity, it suddenly explained those behaviours. And obviously you can't ever use it as an excuse. I couldn't ever go about acting a certain way and then just use it as
well,
I'm autistic, so
what do I know?
Yeah, what do you expect me to do? So you can't use it as an excuse, but it does explain, and it makes you,
especially before the point of awareness as well, when you didn't have coping mechanisms or an understanding of what you needed to optimize your well-being.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think as a mental health advocate myself, I think it's important to say everyone is different. Everybody's mental health and well-being is different. Different coping mechanisms will work for lots of different people. But I think the point that you made about not talking to friends and family is quite a key one that a lot of people find. We think in the abstract, like, oh yeah, I'll talk to my friends and family if I'm struggling. But actually that's probably really difficult for a lot of people. But as you found through talking to a therapist, it can actually be really useful and helpful to talk to someone who is a qualified professional, a third party. They're emotionally very removed from you. They can talk from that objective standpoint and help you on that kind of process to get to know yourself a lot better. So just as a safeguarding tip for anyone listening, obviously people like Samaritans are incredible for this, and that's the reason they are so good at what they do, is because you've got that safety of it being a complete stranger. They have no attachment to you whatsoever. They're not going to give you any bullshit kind of answers. They're not going to tell you anything they think, oh, this is what they're going to need to hear right now. They're completely impartial. So I think we'll probably add a load of links in the show notes anyway to help signpost people to those, won't we?
You're listening to the Big Gig Energy podcast with me, Steve Leggett, and my guest, Alice Lyons. That was the end of part 1. Now, in part 2, Alice interviews me along the more traditional Big Gig Energy interview lines. Here's part 2.
So let's wrap up today's interview with this standard Big Gig Energy quiz, shall we?
Quiz? How dare you? I spent hours coming up with these questions.
Did you?
Yeah,
Well,
I
that's very
constructed them. I constructed them to be the perfect way to truly get to the heart of what makes a musician tick, and you call them a quiz.
Well, that's doubly disappointing, frankly. So, Steve Leggett, what, in your opinion, makes a big gig?
Fuck, I'm not prepared.
I knew that. We get really deep, and then when we try and go shallow,
We've had some great answers to this already on this podcast, so it's quite tough following the two that we've had already as it is. I love Kieran's idea about every single gig is a big gig. You treat it like that, it will feel like a big gig to everyone present, whether they're in the audience or in the band with you, and that's such a valuable attitude to have.
Mm-hmm.
And also Matt's idea about any gig that makes you nervous is a big gig, and I love that because if it's making you nervous, it's got to be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel like that, it's usually a big deal in terms of your career or your progression. It could lead to things, or it could be, in his case, it was a redemption, sort of proving to people that he'd come on so far since his first gigs and showing what a badass he is now compared to then. Not that he wasn't then, because I remember working with him 4 or 5 years ago and he was ridiculous even then. But
I suppose it's different being it and feeling it, isn't it?
yeah, that's it. So no, for me, it's just a blend of all of those things. It's such a cop-out for me to be asking this question and not have a really concise answer to it, but it is that thing of just life and gigs are what you make of them. And I truly believe that if you go into it with that attitude of this will be big, and some of the biggest gigs I've played, I think what it is I want to catch out people and not have people think, yeah, a big gig is the gig where you play a stadium to 60,000 people, because I've played a stadium to 40,000 people, not as many
Only
as
40.
Only 40,000. But I played a stadium to 40,000 people, and I've played a room to 4 people, 2 of whom were my managers, and 2 of whom were the UK's biggest booking agent for cruise ships and his agent. And I'll tell you, the gig to 4 people was a much bigger gig, much more nerve-wracking, and Ukebox are still touring cruise ships to this day because of that gig. So obviously it's not about the numbers, it's not about what you get paid, because obviously the gig to 4 people, that was unpaid. But then if you look at the work we've had from it, maybe it wasn't, in the long run, I guess it was. So it's all subjective, it all varies, but it's what you make it, like life itself. It's what you choose to make it.
I'll accept your answer. So you may have just already answered this question, but what was the biggest gig of your career so far? Would you say that was the one where you were playing to decide the fate of the Ukebox band? Ukebox.
It's difficult to say. Yeah. Having played stages big and small, and every single thing from the smallest of showcases to the grimmest of pubs to packed out football stadiums, and then some of the world's fanciest cruise ships, it's tough to vary. A few stick out in mind. There was one when we got to do Sunday night at the London Palladium, because obviously it's just such an icon in British entertainment. We were there. It was the impressionist Joe Longthorne. Again, a lot of people will need to Google him, but he was very good. His Shirley Bassey impression was just spot on. He was incredible. And it was his 60th birthday, and obviously he's sadly no longer with us. But getting to play that, there's a point we were on first. So there's like the fire screen. There's on the stage, you've got the house band, the orchestra are at the back of the stage, and then you've got a fire screen, and then you've got the curtains maybe 2 or 3 foot in front of that. And I remember stood there with Ukebox. Obviously we had no drummer, so we were able to stand in a row with our mic stands in front of us, and we were between the fire screen and the curtains. And because we were starting the show, we had the orchestra behind us, and they played the Sunday night at the Palladium theme, and then the curtains opened, and we're there playing to all 3 tiers of the London Palladium.
Wow.
And we're there with our management at the time, were quite closely linked to Ricky Tomlinson, so he was there, Jimmy Tarbuck, all these old turns. I think Ken Dodd might even have been there. And then there was the after party, and we're sort of chilling with the likes of Barbara Windsor and all these other sort of classic old turns from the entertainment industry. And it was a huge gig for me, just because, to me, again, my mind being the way it is, to play a big name event like that with all these big names. Obviously there's so much more to music than celebrities, and you work with enough celebrities, you realise they put their trousers on just like the rest of us. You know, everybody shits. But at the same time, it was just a milestone. It's like the first time you get paid for a gig. That's a huge deal, because that's a big milestone. And then for us doing this sort of British entertainment institution that wasn't Britain's Got Talent, it was a huge deal for us. So yeah, ask me again tomorrow and I'll probably have a completely different answer for you. But today, right now, I'm sticking with that.
So thinking about when you first went professional, and when you went full-time as a musician, what gave you the confidence to do that? Was it kind of being surrounded by the group that you were in? Was it that gave you the confidence, or was it just having the right opportunity?
It was timing, I think, for us. We started gigging in our third year of university, I think it was, when we started getting paid for it, and we started doing all the open mics in the pubs during our third year of uni. And then when we graduated, we obviously all had degrees in music, or I think James's was in media and history, or media and politics, something interesting, and media and drama, I think it might have been. But yeah, and we had our degrees, and we were like, well, do we go off and have, inverted commas, real jobs and go and pursue academic careers, or do we just go, well, actually, we're getting paid for this. If we were doing a few more gigs, we could afford to do this full time and still pay our rent. And I think because of the timing of leaving uni, there was the first few months over summer were a bit tight because we didn't have a whole lot of gigs in, but it ended up working out absolutely swimmingly, and we were just able to transition almost seamlessly from being students and being paid a little bit to being full-time professional musicians. We all set it up as a business very shortly after, so we were, you know, fresh out of uni and managers of an entertainments company very soon, an international entertainments company, you know, with gigs and clients abroad. Our first international gig was actually before the cruise ships. We were flown out to Italy, to a beautiful place called San Bernardino del Marsi, by the D'Andrea family, for their son Nemicio's, I think it was his 16th birthday party. Wow. It was the day before my birthday, I think, which is how I remembered it. But I remember flying out there for that, and they were just such a lovely bunch of people. They had us out there, wonderful, wonderful people. And that gig, we just thought, yeah, this is great. We're getting paid to travel. And then I think we'd got back from that, and we'd been home maybe a week from that, still buzzing from that, when we got the first call about cruises. And that was, I remember Mikey ringing me in my flat, and he just said, yeah, Steve, we've been offered a cruise. Are you up for being in Madeira tomorrow night?
Damn.
And I was like, yeah. I think it turned out we'd all been like, yeah. And the rest is history as far as that was concerned. So yeah, we were just very, very lucky. The timing worked out really well, and we were just at a point where we're like, we've not got any other commitments. None of us were married. Some of us had long-term relationships, but luckily our partners were either understanding or on more money than us, so it wasn't a problem. And we were able to just go, yeah, let's do it. And off we went.
Where do you think those opportunities came from as well? Was it just the fact that you kind of all committed to saying, yes, let's try and make a go of this, and you were actively putting irons in fires? Or was it right place, right time, and you were discovered by chance? Like, where did they come from? Because it couldn't have just been, well, was it just luck? What was it?
I'm a huge believer in people making their own luck. Like, we got on the ships because we'd played for the people that became our managers, which were Ricky Tomlinson's managers at the time, at a place called the Green Room in Liverpool. We played in there, and then they'd seen us and sort of taken us up as that, and we played in there because I think someone else had seen us somewhere else. And in our case, we just gigged relentlessly, absolutely relentlessly. There was a bank holiday, it comes up on Facebook Memories occasionally, there was a bank holiday weekend where we played, I think, 14 or 15 gigs in 4 days.
Wow.
And we'd have weekends like that where we'd do one in the morning and then pack down and drive to the next. And we all had, I think at the time we're still in James's Clio, so we're in a Renault Clio and we're there with a full PA system, mic stands, ukuleles and everything, and we're driving from gig to gig, set everything up, do the gig, pack down, drive to the next one. Our last gig on one of them was in the most horrible little bar in Southport, which finished at I think 3 a.m, and we're there and there's like a line of bouncers in front of the stage sort of stopping people from jumping up or whatever, and
glassing you in the face.
Yeah, this is some of the places we played as a ukulele band. Some of the places we ended up. We did the Flying Horse in Rochdale once. That was an experience, because anyone that knows that, it's a proper rock and metal bar, and it's amazing because it's a proper, like, it's just everything you imagine when you think of a rock and metal bar, and then we turn up, these like lads all in matching suits and with ukuleles, and we're there, and the locals are all just like, you're not going to last, this is Rochdale. I can't do the accent, but this is Rochdale. You're not going to last here. And they ended up loving it. And yeah, that for me, that's the biggest power of Ukeboxes, that we had the power to surprise people, and they see lads in suits with ukuleles, they think this is going to be absolute gash. And actually we had something genuinely entertaining that people didn't expect to be good, but when it was, and obviously as a musician that's great, winning people over. As a covers band, you're quite spoilt because you're playing songs that you know people want to hear, and particularly as a function or wedding band, you've chosen your set to be things people want to hear, and they know when they see a band, they know how it's going to sound, they know what to expect. But when you turn up with ukuleles, you don't know if people are ready to hear ukuleles, and a lot of the time they turn up and they're not. We still see it now. Last time I worked with them, we were in Matt and Fred's, and you still see women had brought their boyfriends along, and they brought their partners, and you could tell the men in the audience were there like arms folded looking at you going, what the hell is this? And by the end they're dancing every bit as mad as everyone else.
I think it just shows the power of having a strong USP as well, especially as a covers band. Like, what makes a covers band A different from covers band B? And it's either having a solid gold gimmick, or just having enough of a difference to be like, this is why you need to book us.
But this is a key business thing, and this is, again, is just why you need to have that business lens on everything, is go, why am I different? Why would you hire me? What is my unique selling point? Because there are so many covers bands out there, and to stand out, yes, you've got to be good, but let's face it, it's not very hard to learn Sex on Fire. So you've got to have that extra thing that defines you from the rest. So again, the fact that almost from the very start we were in matching suits and we were playing them on ukuleles, but despite that, because we had the different kinds of them, it still filled the sound out. You still had like the bass end of it and the top end, and then you had 5-part vocal harmonies and all these other things, and it just worked on a technical level. So we were able to follow through on the gimmick, I guess. It's not like we were just there in Teletubby suits or dressed as Power Rangers or something.
Did you consider that?
Always. we did Power Rangers morph suits for Halloween once. It was magical. I was the pink one, of course.
Of course. And finally, since we're musicians, according to the notes.
Yeah, I've written that as if, that's my script you're reading there. So, but then you are a musician.
Am I though?
You are. You play ukulele. For people that don't follow Alice on LinkedIn,
oh, God.
During lockdown, she did an incredible parody. Well, it wasn't a parody song. It was just a legitimate original comedy song.
Yeah.
Because you'd written the music and the lyrics yourself. And I don't remember it was basically about the zeitgeist at the time. I remember you had a very good rhyme for Chris Whitty.
Oh, something like, I'm staying home feeling shitty, so I'm praying to Chris Whitty. Find a cure for COVID-19 because I'm depressed.
Exactly. And it was a thing of beauty. It's still up on LinkedIn now, I'm sure, somewhere. And obviously you've been learning bass as well. You have an excellent teacher, if the teacher may say so themselves. And so you're a musician. I'd say you're a musician. So with that in mind, feel free to read out my question to me again.
I'll embellish then. Finally, since we're both extremely highly proficient musicians,
all right.
Can you recommend an album that people should check out? So it doesn't have to be the greatest album of all time. There's no pressure on that. It doesn't have to be a favourite ever, but something that you're enjoying at the moment that you think other people should have a look at.
I normally insist people only say one for this, but since it's my bloody podcast... I'm going to say 2. And if you got a problem, then go to
HR.
Yeah, that's it. Report to HR. He'll tell you to stop being a whiny little bitch. Yeah, I'd go with... right now, I'm listening an awful lot to King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I unexpectedly saw them in Paris a few weeks ago.
It's so cosmopolitan.
I know. I was there anyway to see Clowncore, who were amazing.
You bougie bitch.
I know. And they happened to be playing the next door. So following a drunken conversation with some lads outside Clowncore, we then booked tickets and went to see King Gizzard the next day. And I knew them for their Rattlesnake song, which is a proper meme. And it's a meme of a song. It's not really you don't watch it for the song, you watch it for the crappy graphics and go, oh, those Australians, they're crazy. But I listened to some of their back catalogue at the show, because obviously they're playing a really wide set. They never play the same set twice. And a lot of it floored me. I was like, this is really good. Like, these guys can play, they're influenced by pretty much everything. And obviously, not only are they a genuinely good rock band, but then they've got their microtonal and their like Eastern influences. And this idea of incorporating microtonal guitars and instruments into their set, it's just a complete vibe. I mean, I've shown you some of this in the car. It's an experience.
I was going to say,
isn't it?
every time we listen to it, you pick up on something different in terms of the technical skill. Or like when I watched Rattlesnake, I was like, is it really daft of me to say there are 2 drummers? But that is quite rare to have 2 drummers.
Yeah, absolutely. So
it just adds such a depth to it. And
I suppose I should recommend an album, shouldn't I, rather than just go on about the... If I had to pick one out of their back catalogue, Omnium Gatherum, which is one of about 20 albums they released last year.
Wow.
It's varied, and it sort of, you got everything from MGMT style synth pop right through to... There's a couple of songs on there that sound like Goldie Looking Chain. There's just a proper range, and it's quality.
So what kind of vibe would this suit? Listen to this album when you're high as fuck? Like, what?
I mean, yeah, why not? Why not? Yeah, do that. Yeah, it's an experience. I think if you got to be kind of open-minded to it, because it does take a lot of left turns all over the place, and it keeps you on your toes. But
when you're intellectually curious.
Absolutely. Because like I say, the range of styles that they cover on this thing, it starts off with like a 9-minute psych jam, and then goes into this MGMT style tune, and then a few later you've got this like weird, it almost, one of them actually on there, what's it called, the Grim Reaper I think it's called, it's basically the Hitchers song from Mighty Boosh. I know you've not seen that yet, but I will force you to watch it after this recording. Anyone who knows the Hitcher will absolutely know what I'm going on about there.
And what was the second album you liked?
Second out, this is just an all-time thing, this is a legacy thing in terms of the album that's influenced me the most, that if somebody, like if an alien lands and I have to go, oh, welcome to Earth, by the way, check out some of our art before you annihilate us. Stadium Arcadium by the Chili's.
Yeah.
As a bassist and as a guitarist and as a musician in general, the depth and the complexity of stuff on there, just the range of music and the way it's recorded, the musicianship from all 4 of them is absolutely incredible on it. The harmonies, the production, it's all there. And I know it's a bit of a basic answer, and a lot of people sniff at it, but actually, if you get a chance, go back and just listen to the whole double album, because it's beautiful, and it's basically one of the 2 albums that got me into music in the first place. Between that and Pulse by Pink Floyd, like those 2 things got me into music in the first place. And for an album to be that good that it makes a 16-year-old kid whose only interest is helping out in the library to pass the time during school, for them to hear that and go, right, I want to learn bass and guitar and be a musician and do it professionally. If an album can do that, it's worth listening to.
Pretty fucking powerful, isn't it?
You're damn right.
And what a wholesome way to end the interview. So, Steve, thank you for your time today. And thank you for Big Gig Energy. I think it's such a beautiful project that you've started. And hopefully there'll be a season 2 if this hasn't traumatised you too much from the production and the post and editing and all the rest of it. But yeah, hopefully, I think you will have helped a lot of people to reconnect to their Big Gig Energy, hopefully.
Oh, thanks very much, Alice. And thanks so much for your support as well, and for coming on the podcast and interviewing me, giving me a week off from interviewing.
You're welcome.
It's an experience being a guest, but thank you so much. And
let's get some dinner on, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, there you have it. That was part 2 of the final interview of the season. Huge thanks to Alice for coming on and interviewing me for this. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you found that useful. Just scratching the surface of mental health and well-being within the music industry through my own experiences. Again, if you feel affected by any of the items discussed in this, I will be putting some links in the description of some people you can get in touch with and some resources that are available, specifically with regards suicidality. Now, I should mention while I'm on the subject, I've made a point of not having a sponsor for this series. I funded the entire project from my own pocket, from buying an iMac, an interface, studio monitors, fancy mic, building a website, setting up RSS feeds and all that. I've done it all off my own back. But one person who deserves more credit than any other is this week's guest, Alice Lyons. She's been amazingly supportive throughout, helping me edit and sense check each and every episode. So if you'd indulge me, I'd like to take a moment to just plug her podcasts here. The big takeaway from this series has hopefully been that being a self-employed musician is essentially the same as running a business, which comes with all of the benefits of this, but also all of the drawbacks. Being in business can really suck sometimes. Alice's first podcast, Mind Over Grind, addresses this head-on and aims to help get everyone's work and well-being working together. Through solo episodes and interviews, Alice and her guests discuss how to work well, stay sane, and maybe even have fun in the process. Now, it's a sad fact that in 2020, the UK suicide rate was over 5,000. The performing arts sector is inextricably linked to depression and suicide as a result of many high-profile cases over the years, which is why Alice's second podcast, Solving Suicide, may well be worth checking out for many of us. I say may well because due to the subject matter, obviously the discussions can be very heavy, and I urge you only to listen if you're feeling in a safe headspace to do so. But the best way to zero the death rate is going to be to destigmatise and remove the taboo from the subject. And as someone that, as I've explained, I've experienced feelings of suicidality in the past, up to and including the point of making attempts, I feel strongly that we need to talk about it more as an industry and as human beings, and the Solving Suicide podcast is an excellent way to broaden our understanding on this. Even things like using the correct terminology, for example, saying died by rather than committed suicide. Saying committed harks back to a time when it was actually illegal to do so. Things like that can make an enormous difference in furthering the conversation and destigmatising the subject so that we can hope to work to prevent it in future. So that's my pitch for those. I really hope you're able to check them out and find them interesting. I'll of course be posting links to these and Alice's other work in the show notes. But to conclude, there we have it, the end of the final episode of the first season of Big Gig Energy. Thank you so much to everyone who's listened to the podcast so far. It really means the absolute world to have launched something and had people actually take the time to listen. Thank you so much for joining me on this. The overall message of the last 10 episodes boils down to this. Music is beautiful and intense and amazing and spiritual and a true calling to so many people. But in order to get the best from it, you need to bring your best self to every aspect of it, from your gigs to your planning to your branding. You've got to treat your band as your brand and treat that brand as a business venture. If you can do this, you'll unlock so many more doors than you would have done otherwise. I hope this has been useful to you. Do please, of course, leave a review or rating if you can. For the sake of a couple of taps on your phone screen, they make a huge difference to my reach and my ego, and will, of course, help new people discover the podcast and help it to grow in future. I'm always on the lookout for new and expensive and sexy microphones, and, obviously having a bigger reach will help me justify the expense. But anyway, thank you so much again for listening. Big Gig Energy forever. Peace out.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Big Gig Energy podcast. This is the bit where I'm obliged to fish for engagement and stuff, so you can find me on Instagram as Big Gig Energy, that's BIGGIGENERGY, or you can get in touch via email at biggigenergy@gmail.com. I'll link anything relevant in the show notes below, but otherwise, if you've had any thoughts on this episode or would be interested in some one-to-one coaching for yourself and or your band, feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, do all the usual social media stuff, I guess, and let's keep the discussion going. Many thanks as ever to all my supporters and collaborators, and as always, best of luck with your next big gig.